The tradition started by accident, which is the best way for these things to begin. It was March 8th, International Women's Day, and while most people were probably buying flowers or posting #empowerment quotes on Instagram, Alex walked into my apartment holding a traffic cone. "Happy Women's Day," he said, dropping it in the middle of my living room. I stared at the cone, then at him. "What?" He grinned like this was perfectly normal. I saw it on the side of the road and thought, that's Hazel energy right there. "Why?" "Because you're bossy, loud, and impossible to ignore." I should have been offended, but I wasn't. Alex had that effect on me. I laughed instead. "Wow, thanks. So thoughtful." "You're welcome," he said, completely serious. That should have been the end of it, but something about that stupid cone stuck with me. Maybe it was the sheer randomness of it, or the fact that Alex genuinely believed he'd nailed the assignment. Either way, when his birthday rolled around 2 months later, I showed up at his door holding a garden gnome painted to look like Batman. "Happy birthday," I said. He blinked at it, then at me. "What is this?" "A metaphor," I said. "Because you're small, strange, and way too obsessed with justice." He burst out laughing, and just like that, the game began. By the next year, it had evolved into something of an arms race. On Women's Day, Alex gifted me a plush shark wearing sunglasses. "Because you're terrifying but also kind of cool," he explained. For his birthday, I found a taxidermied squirrel playing a tiny banjo. "Because you're nuts, but occasionally charming." Every gift had to be weirder than the last, but they also had to make sense, a reflection of the other person, distilled into the strangest object we could find. It was like a bizarre, high-stakes personality test, and neither of us was willing to back down. The 4th year, Alex gave me a custom-made t-shirt that said "World's Okayest Cult Leader" across the front. "What does that even mean?" I asked, holding it up. "You're charismatic enough to convince people to follow you," he said, "but disorganized enough to get everyone lost in the woods." It was annoyingly accurate. For his birthday, I commissioned a local artist to paint a portrait of Alex as a medieval knight. He was holding a sword made out of French fries, and his armor was covered in post-it notes. "This is incredible," he said, staring at it in awe. "Why fries?" "Because you're gallant but fueled entirely by junk food." The tradition started to bleed into the rest of our lives. If I saw something bizarre, like a cookie jar shaped like a UFO, I'd snap a picture and text Alex, "You, but make it ceramic." He'd reply with a photo of a ceramic frog holding a martini. "You, but classier." It was fun. It was us. But by the 5th year, something shifted. Alex gave me a snow globe. Inside was a tiny diorama of a woman sitting alone on a park bench, staring up at a moonlit sky. "This is beautiful," I said, surprised. "It reminded me of you," he said. "Why? Do I give off sad park bench energy?" I tried to laugh, but his expression stopped me. "Not sad," he said. "Just thoughtful. Like you're always somewhere else, even when you're here." For the first time, the gift didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a mirror, and I wasn't sure I liked what it was reflecting. "Thanks," I said, quieter than usual. When his birthday rolled around, I panicked. I scrolled through Etsy, eBay, even Craigslist, but nothing felt right. The playful absurdity of our tradition suddenly felt too small, too hollow. So I did the unthinkable. I gave him something normal. It was a leather-bound notebook, the kind that smelled like old libraries and adventure. Inside, I wrote, "For the stories you'll write someday, because you've always got one waiting to be told." Alex opened it, ran his fingers over the cover, and smiled in a way that made my chest hurt. "This is different," he said. "Yeah," I admitted. "I like it." We didn't talk about the shift, but it was there, unspoken, hovering between us. The next year, Alex gave me a compass. "Is this another metaphor?" I asked. "Sort of," he said. "It's for when you're lost." Which, let's be honest, is always. I laughed, but something about the gift felt weightier than before. Like he wasn't just making fun of me, but also trying to guide me, in his own way. For his birthday, I gave him a pocket watch with a note inside. "Because you're always running late, but at least you'll look classy while doing it." He grinned when he saw it, but there was something else in his eyes. Something softer, something unspoken. This year, We met up on March 8th, as always. Alex handed me a gift bag, and I pulled out a tiny bonsai tree. Why a bonsai? I asked, tilting my head. Because you're complicated, high maintenance, and secretly kind of beautiful, he said, his voice teasing but warm. I swallowed the lump in my throat and handed him my gift. It was a map of the stars, the kind that shows the constellations from a specific night and location. What night is this? He asked, his finger tracing the swirling patterns. The night we met, I said softly, because you're the one thing I didn't know I was looking for. Alex looked at me, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he smiled, a real smile, the kind that made me feel like I just won something. Hazel, he said, this might be your best one yet. We're still doing the tradition, though it's not quite the same anymore. The gifts are less ridiculous, more thoughtful, but every now and then, we slip in something absurd. A reminder of where it all started. And honestly, I think that's the best part. AITA? When Aiden sent me the link to the Global Culinary Fusion Experience workshop, I thought it sounded thrillingly exotic. The tagline read, "Where the world's flavors collide," and boasted dishes that blended techniques and ingredients from different cultures. I imagined us creating mind-blowing culinary hybrids, like tacos with Korean barbecue or tiramisu reimagined as a Middle Eastern dessert. We should do this, Aiden said, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. Let's unleash our inner chefs. Inner chefs. Right. Mine was a meticulous stickler for order, and his was a drunk pirate who cooked with wild abandon. But I said yes because Aiden had this way of making chaos look like an adventure, and I wanted to believe we could find some kind of middle ground. The class was in a converted industrial loft downtown. The vibe was chic and intimidating, with gleaming metal countertops and jars of obscure spices labeled in handwriting so fancy it was almost illegible. The instructor, Chef Elena, introduced herself with a dramatic flourish, her accent impossible to place. She seemed exactly the kind of person who would throw saffron into mac and cheese just because she could. Today, she declared, you will create your own fusion masterpiece. You will have guidelines, but no recipes. The only limit is your imagination. I felt my stomach tighten. Guidelines but no recipes? What did that even mean? Aiden, of course, was already gleaming with excitement. This is gonna be awesome, he whispered. We get to wing it. I gave him a tight smile. Sure. Awesome. Our station was set up with a base protein, a medley of vegetables, and sauces from around the globe. There were 3 types of dough for bread or noodles, and a collection of herbs that looked like they'd been handpicked by elves. Chef Elena explained we were to create something uniquely ours, a fusion dish that blended at least 3 cultural cuisines. The catch? We had to name our creation and justify the combination of flavors to the group. Let's start with the chicken, I suggested, trying to establish some order. We can build around that. Aiden was already peeling a mango. Chicken's boring. Let's do something wild, like mango lamb dumplings. Mango lamb? What? I stared at him as he mashed the fruit with his hands. That's not a thing. Exactly, he said, grinning. It's fusion, babe. Think outside the box. I took a deep breath, reminding myself this was supposed to be fun. Okay, but maybe we should test the flavors first? You know, see if they work together. He waved me off, reaching for a jar of what looked like harissa paste. Nah, you can't taste creativity into existence. You just go with it. I turned my focus back to the chicken, meticulously seasoning it with a careful balance of soy sauce, garlic, and lime. Fine, I muttered. You do your thing, I'll do mine. The next hour was a study in contrasts. I diced, measured, and tasted as I went, crafting a dish that combined Japanese-style teriyaki chicken with Peruvian aji amarillo sauce, served over freshly steamed bao buns. It was clean, deliberate, and, if I might say so, elegant. Aiden, meanwhile, was operating like a man possessed. He dumped the mango lamb mixture into a bowl, tossed in what I think was some kind of Middle Eastern spice blend, and folded it into dough that he pressed with reckless enthusiasm. When I suggested he check the seasoning, he just winked at me and said, "Gotta leave room for the mystery." When the dishes were finally plated, The room was filled with the mingling aromas of creativity and occasional regret. My bao buns looked magazine-ready, with their glossy sauce and careful garnish of pickled onions. Aiden's dumplings looked lumpy, like someone had overstuffed them with leftover ideas. But, to his credit, they smelled pretty good. Chef Elena walked around, tasting each dish and nodding thoughtfully. When she got to us, I presented mine first. "This is a Japanese Peruvian bao bun," I said, trying not to sound too proud. "It's a balance of umami and heat, with a soft, pillowy texture to tie it all together." She took a bite and closed her eyes, murmuring, "Very precise, very thoughtful." Then it was Aiden's turn. "These are mango lamb dumplings," he said with a grin, "inspired by, everywhere. They're sweet, spicy, and a little chaotic. Like me." Chef Elena took a bite. For a moment, her expression was unreadable. Then she tilted her head and said, "Chaotic is right, but intriguing, very bold." I could feel Aiden practically vibrating with pride beside me. "Bold," he whispered to me, smirking. "Hear that? She gets it." After the tasting, we gathered to share our creations with the rest of the class. That's when the real fun started. My bao buns were well received, with lots of polite nods and compliments about the balance and execution. But Aiden's dumplings? Oh, they stole the show. People laughed, winced, and marveled at the audacity of the flavor combination. Someone even called them unexpectedly addictive, which made Aiden beam like a proud parent. On the way home, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Okay, but admit it. Your dumplings were insane." "Insanely delicious, you mean?" he shot back, his grin maddeningly smug. "They were barely holding together. And the flavors, mango and lamb? You can't just throw random stuff together and call it genius." "Why not?" he said, unfazed. "You're so obsessed with getting it right that you miss out on the magic. Sometimes the best things happen when you stop trying to control everything." "Magic?" I scoffed. "It's cooking, not wizardry." "Cooking is wizardry," he said, throwing his hands up like he'd just conjured a feast out of thin air. "You take boring stuff like flour and meat and turn it into something memorable. Who cares if it's messy?" I wanted to argue, but I couldn't help thinking about the laughter in the room when people tried his dish. They might not have called it refined, but they remembered it. It stuck with them. And maybe, just maybe, I was a little jealous. When we got home, Aiden grabbed a random assortment of snacks from the kitchen, pretzels, peanut butter, and some leftover strawberries, and started assembling them on a plate. I rolled my eyes, but I joined him anyway, because maybe he was right. Maybe there was something to be said for embracing the chaos. So now I'm left wondering, AITA for wanting to respect the craft of cooking? Or does Aiden have a point that sometimes the mess is the magic? I have this terrible habit of saying the thing I shouldn't at the exact worst moment. You know the type. When everyone else is holding their breath and bracing for a magical memory, I'm the guy who shows up with a pin and pops the whole thing. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I genuinely think I'm adding to the fun. Which brings me to the disaster that was my cousin Ellie's wedding. Ellie's the golden child of our family, the one who actually followed the straight and narrow path. Honors student, Ivy League grad, high-powered job at some finance firm, and now marrying her high school sweetheart, Derek. Derek is so boringly perfect he might as well have been 3D printed from a rom-com script. Kind, handsome, good at making small talk with your weird uncle. He's basically a human golden retriever. The wedding was everything you'd expect from Ellie. Tasteful, elegant, expensive. It was held at this vineyard that looked like something out of a movie, all rolling hills and sunsets. Everyone was dressed to the nines, sipping wine that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And me? Well, I was in the back, nursing my third glass of Merlot and thinking, this could use some spice. The ceremony itself was lovely but long. Like, comically long. Ellie and Derek had written their own vows, and Derek's went on forever. "I vow to be your rock, your shelter, your partner in every storm," he said, his voice quivering with emotion. Sweet, sure, but after 10 minutes, I was starting to wonder if we'd need intermission snacks. I glanced around and saw I wasn't alone. People were shifting in their seats, fidgeting with programs, stifling yawns. That's when I got the idea. When it was Ellie's turn to say her vows, she reached into her bouquet and pulled out a piece of paper. "Derek," she began, her voice steady and clear, "from the moment I met you, I knew." And that's when I said it, just loud enough for the people around me to hear, but quiet enough that it didn't seem deliberate. Is it just me? Or does this feel like the series finale of The Bachelor? The row in front of me stifled a collective gasp, followed by a few scattered chuckles. My aunt whipped her head around, her eyes wide, and mouthed, "What are you doing?" But the damage was done. Ellie paused mid-sentence, her lips twitching like she was trying to decide whether to ignore it or throw her bouquet at my face. Derek turned around too, giving me this hurt puppy dog look like I just told him Santa wasn't real. But here's the thing. People laughed. A whole row of Ellie's college friends were giggling into their hands. Even the officiant cracked a smile before quickly composing herself. I thought it had gone over well. Sure, maybe it wasn't planned. But isn't that what makes a moment memorable? Apparently not. After the ceremony, I tried to blend into the crowd, figuring Ellie would be too busy basking in marital bliss to care. But no, I hadn't even made it to the hors d'oeuvres table before Ellie stormed up to me, still in her wedding dress, bouquet clutched in a death grip. "Seriously, Matt?" she hissed. "You couldn't go one day without making a joke?" "What?" I said, holding up my hands. "It wasn't that bad." People laughed. "This isn't a comedy show," she snapped. "It's my wedding. My wedding. Do you even understand how much effort I put into making this perfect?" "It was perfect," I said, trying to backpedal. "I just added some levity." She stared at me like I just told her I brought Taco Bell to the reception. Levity? During my vows? Are you kidding me? At this point, her mom, my aunt, swooped in to defuse the situation, dragging Ellie away while giving me a look that said, "You are dead to me." I decided it was probably a good time to retreat to the bar. The rest of the night was tense. Derek avoided me completely. My mom whispered something about me ruining the moment and threatened to ground me, which is hilarious considering I'm 27. The college friends who laughed at my joke came up to me later, giggling and saying, "That was so savage." But the mood had shifted. Ellie and Derek seemed distant, and even the DJ struggled to get people on the dance floor. Fast forward to now, a week later, and Ellie still isn't speaking to me. She posted all these gorgeous wedding photos on Instagram with captions like, "The perfect day with the perfect man." But I noticed I'm mysteriously absent from every picture. My mom says I owe her a massive apology. Derek's sister texted me, calling me insensitive. But honestly, I don't get it. I wasn't mocking their love. If anything, I was helping. I broke the tension, gave people a moment to laugh, to breathe. Isn't that what weddings are about? Celebrating, enjoying the moment, not taking everything so seriously. Ellie's always been a little intense. Maybe she needs to loosen up. And Derek? Come on, the guy's built like a Disney prince. If anyone can handle a little ribbing, it's him. So now I'm left wondering, did I really ruin the wedding, or is everyone just overreacting? AITA? It all started with a secret recipe. No, really, a literal recipe. My grandmother's legendary chocolate cake, the one that had one county fair ribbons, graced every family celebration, and even earned her a feature in the local paper. She'd always said it was her legacy, the one thing she'd pass down to her children and grandchildren. For years, she guarded it like it was the formula for Coca-Cola. Growing up, I watched her shoo away anyone who dared linger too long in the kitchen while she measured, mixed, and folded. When she passed away last year, she left the recipe to my mom and me in her will, handwritten on a faded index card. It felt like inheriting a piece of family history or a priceless artifact. Mom was so serious about preserving it that she laminated the card and locked it in a fireproof box. A few weeks ago, my cousin Mia called me, nearly in tears. She was organizing a bake sale for her kids' school and wanted to make something truly special. She begged me to share the recipe. "Please, Lily. Grandma would want me to carry on her legacy, too. This isn't about the family secret. It's for the kids." Now, look, I loved Mia, but she had a reputation for being a bit careless. She'd burn cookies, forget ingredients, and once famously substituted salt for sugar in a pumpkin pie. Still, I figured, What's the harm? It's not like she was entering a baking competition or something. I made her promise not to share it with anyone, swore her to secrecy, and then texted her a photo of the recipe. Just follow it to the letter, okay? The bake sale came and went, and I thought nothing more of it until 2 weeks later, when my brother Jonah sent me a link to a TikTok. "You're not gonna believe this," he texted. I opened the video to find Mia, standing in her brightly lit kitchen, enthusiastically announcing, "Hey, guys! Today, I'm going to show you how to make my Grandma Evelyn's award-winning chocolate cake. It's been a family secret for years, but I just had to share it with you all." My jaw hit the floor. She went step by step, reading off every detail of the recipe, right down to the specific brand of cocoa powder my grandmother swore by. The comments section was already flooded with praise and questions. "OMG, this looks amazing. Is this the one that won the fair? Thanks for sharing, Mia." I called her immediately, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Mia, what the hell were you thinking?" She had the audacity to laugh. "Relax, Lily. It's just a recipe. And besides, look at how much people love it." Grandma would have been so proud to see her cake reaching so many people. Proud? I spluttered. She spent her entire life keeping that recipe a secret. She trusted us with it. You had no right to share it with strangers. "Oh, come on," she said, her tone turning defensive. "It's not like I sold it to a bakery or something. I just wanted to spread some joy. Don't be so uptight." I hung up on her, fuming, but it only got worse from there. The video went viral. BuzzFeed picked it up. Mia got interviewed for some foodie podcast. Meanwhile, my mom, blissfully unaware until then, called me in a panic. "Lily, why is Grandma's recipe all over the internet? You didn't tell anyone, did you?" I wanted to crawl into a hole. "Mom, it wasn't me. It was Mia. She said it was for a bake sale and I didn't think. You gave it to her?" Mom cut me off, her voice icy. "Do you realize what you've done? That was supposed to stay in the family. Now it's just out there, for anyone to use. Your grandmother would be heartbroken." I tried to defend myself. "It's not like I handed it out to random people. I trusted Mia, and she betrayed that trust, not me. She couldn't have shared it if you hadn't given it to her," Mom snapped. "That recipe was sacred, Lily. It was the one thing your grandmother left us, and now it's gone." The guilt hit me like a freight train, but at the same time, I couldn't help feeling like everyone was overreacting. It was just a cake, wasn't it? Delicious, sure, but still just flour, sugar, and cocoa. And honestly, the internet was full of recipes claiming to be the best chocolate cake ever. Was it really that big of a deal? When Mia called later to clear the air, I let her have it. "You completely violated my trust. I told you not to share it with anyone." "Geez, Lily, it's not like I told people your social security number. It's a recipe. Recipes are meant to be shared. Stop acting like I sold state secrets." "That's not the point," I shouted. "It wasn't yours to share. You disrespected Grandma's wishes, and you made me look like an idiot in the process." She sighed, clearly annoyed. "Look, I'm sorry if you're upset, but I don't regret it. People are loving it. Isn't that what Grandma would have wanted? For her cake to make people happy?" I didn't answer. Now, the recipe is out there, living its viral life, while my family treats me like I personally leaked the Pentagon Papers. I can't stop wondering, was I really in the wrong for trusting Mia? Was this really such a catastrophic betrayal? Or is everyone else just being ridiculously sentimental about an old cake recipe? The storm rolled in faster than I expected, thunder growling low like some ancient beast waking up from a deep sleep. I was halfway through fixing the wobbly leg of the coffee table when the power flickered once, then died completely. Great. Another evening lit by the cheap candles we kept in the drawer for moments like this. I stayed crouched under the table for a moment, screwdriver in hand, listening to the rain hammer the windows. It wasn't like there was anything else to do. Mila was out at her art class, and I wasn't expecting her back for another hour or two. I was alone, which meant I didn't have to explain to anyone why I wasn't answering my phone. It had been buzzing off and on all day. I knew who it was. It was always the same name, the same problem. Dad. The last voicemail he left was a masterpiece of passive aggression. "Hey, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Hope everything's okay. I guess you're just too busy these days to call your old man. That's fine. Take care." I almost called him back after that one. Almost. But what would I even say? That I wasn't avoiding him. Just the avalanche of guilt he brought with him every time we talked? That I wasn't sure how many more times I could hear him say, "I just don't understand why you had to move so far away," without snapping. The truth was, I'd had enough of him. Enough of the thinly veiled disappointment in his voice every time I reminded him that no, I wasn't coming home for Christmas this year. Enough of the lectures about how I was wasting my potential by hiding out in the mountains instead of moving back to Ohio where, according to him, real life happened. The rain lashed harder against the windows. I left the coffee table leg half fixed and wandered into the kitchen, lighting one of the candles and setting it on the counter. Its weak flame barely lit the room, but it was better than nothing. I was reaching for a glass when the phone rang again, loud in the silence. I ignored it, but the buzzing didn't stop. A second call, then a third. "Jesus," I muttered, snatching it up. "What?" "Danny." It wasn't Dad. It was Aunt Carol, and her voice was tight with something I couldn't place. "You need to come home." My stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "It's your dad," she said, and then the words started tumbling out faster than I could process them. "Heart attack. Ambulance. The hospital." I barely remember what I said before I hung up. Something about booking a flight. Something about calling back. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone when I tried to pull up the airline app. By the time Mila got home, I was already packed. "What's going on?" she asked, her face pale when she saw me by the door with a suitcase. I told her everything in one breathless rush. She nodded, grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door, and told me to text her when I landed. The airport was chaos, as always, but I didn't notice. All I could think about was the last conversation I'd had with my dad. The fight. The words I'd thrown at him like knives. "You can't control me anymore. Stop trying." The flight was long. Too long. By the time I landed, it was nearly dawn. Aunt Carol met me at the hospital. "He's stable," she said, putting a hand on my shoulder. But it was close. I nodded, numb. When I stepped into his room, he was awake but pale, hooked up to more machines than I could count. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, he didn't look angry or disappointed. He just looked tired. "You came," he said, his voice weak but steady. "Of course I came," I said, pulling a chair up to his bedside. "You're my dad." He smiled faintly, then closed his eyes, as if even that small effort had drained him. We didn't talk much that day. I sat with him while he slept, watching the rise and fall of his chest, the steady beep of the heart monitor. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence with explanations or justifications. When he woke up again, he looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "For what?" "For making you feel like you had to prove something to me," he said. "You don't. You never did." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. It wasn't a perfect moment. It didn't erase the years of tension or the countless arguments we'd had, but it was a start. And for the first time, it felt like maybe we'd both stop trying to fix each other and just be. When I left the hospital later that week, I felt lighter. The mountains would still be there when I got home, their peaks sharp and unyielding against the sky. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could see beyond them, like I could carry a piece of Ohio with me without letting it weigh me down. When my phone buzzed with the notification, I already knew what it was. Another message from my brother, Mark. Another request, disguised as a casual text. "Mark, hey sis, can you pick up Mom from the airport tomorrow at 5? I'd do it, but I've got this thing. You're the best." The thing was probably Mark's weekly pickleball game. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, and for the first time in a long time, I typed the word, "No." "Me, sorry, can't do it. Busy with work and stuff. You'll have to figure it out." It felt like committing a crime. My heart raced as I hit send, and for a split second, I thought about throwing my phone out the window. Then, the inevitable response. "Mark, wow. Seriously? It's Mom. You can't be too busy for Mom. That's when I knew this wouldn't end quietly. To understand why this was a big deal, you need to know that I've always been the reliable sibling. Mark was the golden child, charming and well-loved, but reliability? Not his thing. If a relative needed help moving, fixing something, or organizing a party, I was the one they called. If Mark was asked, he'd have a thing, or would just smile his way out of it. And me? I always said yes, because someone had to. But this time was different. It wasn't just about picking Mom up. It was about everything that led to this moment. The countless favors, the sacrifices, the times I'd canceled my plans to cover for Mark, or do something he'd promised but never followed through on. I'd convinced myself it was okay, until it wasn't. When Mom called later that night, her voice was warm but edged with concern. "Hi, sweetie. Mark mentioned you're too busy to pick me up tomorrow?" And there it was. Mark, outsourcing his guilt trip. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone even. "I have deadlines this week, and I'm pretty swamped. I thought Mark could handle it." "Oh, you know your brother," Mom said with a laugh. "He's got so much on his plate." I blinked at that. Mark's plate was about as full as a toddler's at a salad bar. "I have a lot on my plate too," I said. "More than usual lately. I'm really sorry, Mom, but I just can't do it this time." The pause that followed felt longer than a symphony. "I understand," she said, her tone softer now. But then she added, "It's just not like you. Not like me." The next day, I didn't hear from Mark or Mom. I assumed he'd figured something out, maybe convinced one of his friends to step in. But that evening, my cousin Anna called. She started with small talk, but it didn't take long to get to the point. "I heard you left Mark hanging with the airport thing," she said. Her tone was light, but I could feel the judgment buried underneath. "Mark left himself hanging," I corrected. "I said no. That's it." Anna sighed like she was disappointed in me. "You've always been the dependable one. It's just surprising, that's all. Family comes first, you know?" Ah, the mantra. Family comes first. I'd heard it so many times it might as well have been embroidered on a pillow in our living room. But what they really meant was, your family comes first. Always. My needs were never part of the equation. By Friday, the guilt train was barreling full steam ahead. Mark had called me twice, and I hadn't answered. Mom sent a text, "Love you, sweetie. Hope everything's okay." Which might as well have been a polite way of saying, "We need to talk." And talk we did. At dinner that Sunday, Mom brought it up again. The table was crowded with relatives, and the air was thick with roasted chicken and passive aggression. "So," she said casually, "Mark told me he ended up having to pay for an Uber. Cost a small fortune." Mark, sitting across from me, looked up from his plate with a martyred expression. "Yeah, but it's fine. I made it work. No big deal." I took a sip of water, letting the moment stretch uncomfortably before replying. "Glad you figured it out." Mom frowned. "It's just, you're usually so helpful. Is everything okay? You've seemed a little off." There it was again. Off. Like I was malfunctioning. "I'm fine," I said, my voice measured. "I just needed a break this week. I can't always be the one to handle everything." Mark made a scoffing sound. "Oh, come on. It's not like I ask you for favors all the time." I put my fork down, my appetite disappearing. "Mark, I've been covering for you for years. Every time you can't do something, I step in, and no one bats an eye because that's just what I do. But guess what? I'm tired." The table went quiet. Even the sound of forks scraping plates seemed to vanish. Mom, bless her heart, looked genuinely confused. "We never meant to make you feel that way." I almost believed her, but then Mark chimed in. "So what? You're just done with us now? Too busy for family?" "I'm not done," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "But I'm not going to keep running myself ragged while you skate by, Mark. Maybe it's time you started being the reliable one for once." He didn't respond. He just sat there, his jaw tight, like I'd insulted his very existence. Mom tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but the tension lingered. Now it's Monday, and I'm still replaying it in my head, wondering if I went too far. Was it selfish to say no? Could I have handled it better? Maybe. But part of me thinks it's about time someone else picked up the slack. So, internet. AITA? It started with the pizza. Or maybe it started earlier, with the desperation I felt when I said yes to this babysitting gig. My friend Sarah had passed it off to me like it was the holy grail. They pay cash, the kids are easy, and they usually order takeout. It's a dream job, she gushed. She conveniently left out the part where the parents were lunatics. The house was massive, perched on a hill with floor-to-ceiling windows that seemed like they'd crack if you breathed too hard. The parents greeted me at the door, two well-dressed professionals with sharp smiles and even sharper eyes. "Thank you for stepping in last minute," the mom said. Her tone was polite, but her eyes lingered on my scuffed sneakers like they might leave dirt prints on her marble floors. "No problem," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Focus on the kids," I told myself. Kids are easy. The boys, Ben and Liam, were adorable at first. Ben, the younger one, had sticky fingers and a mischievous grin that screamed future lawyer. Liam was quieter, older, with a calculating glint in his eye like he was sizing me up for a game of chess I didn't know we were playing. "Dinner's pizza," the mom said as she grabbed her coat. "Cash is on the counter. Bedtime's 9:30. Call if there's an emergency." Then they were gone, their sleek black car humming down the driveway, and I was left alone with two boys who clearly smelled fear. The pizza arrived about 30 minutes later, and the boys were practically vibrating with excitement. I paid the delivery guy, brought the food to the kitchen, and opened the box to reveal a glorious, grease-laden masterpiece. It was a large cheese pizza, the kind where the slices are so big you need two hands to eat one properly. There was also a box of breadsticks and a container of marinara sauce. "Can we eat in the living room?" Ben asked, his eyes wide and hopeful. "No way," Liam interjected, his tone the perfect imitation of a parental scolding. Mom said no eating near the white couch. We compromised with the kitchen table. I served them slices and grabbed one for myself because, let's face it, I hadn't eaten since noon. 2 slices and a breadstick. That was it. Nothing outrageous. The boys inhaled their food, then spent the next hour building a fort out of couch cushions and arguing over who got to be the president of their imaginary kingdom. By the time bedtime rolled around, they were yawning but still giggling as I tucked them in. Success. I felt like I'd nailed it. Then the parents came home. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when the door opened. The mom walked in first, her heels clicking against the floor, followed by the dad, who looked mildly annoyed even before he saw me. "How were the boys?" the mom asked, hanging up her coat. "They were great," I said, standing up. "They had pizza, played for a while, and went to bed without a fuss." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Pizza?" she echoed, like the word itself was offensive. "Yes," I said, my smile faltering. "It was delicious." Her expression shifted, tightening just enough to send a prickle of unease down my spine. "You ate the pizza?" I blinked, caught off guard. Yeah. I had a couple of slices. The boys had plenty." "We didn't hire you to eat our food," the dad interrupted, his tone cold enough to freeze lava. For a second, I thought he was joking. When he didn't laugh, I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment and a touch of anger. "I'm sorry. I thought it was okay. Most families I've babysat for, it's sort of assumed." "Not here," the mom said crisply. "We expect you to come prepared if you need to eat." Prepared? What was I supposed to do? Whip out a granola bar from my bag like some starving college student and nibble on it in a corner while the kids ate their fill? "I didn't mean any harm," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There was more than enough left over." "That's not the point," the dad snapped. "We hired you to watch the kids, not raid the fridge." "Raid the fridge?" I had 2 slices of pizza and a breadstick. It wasn't like I'd stuffed my bag with their fine china or made off with a bottle of wine from their collection. I wanted to argue, to point out how ridiculous they were being, but instead, I grabbed my bag, muttered a quick, "Thank you for letting me know," and left. As I walked down their winding driveway, the cool night air biting at my cheeks, I felt a simmering rage building in my chest. This wasn't just about pizza. It was about respect, or their complete lack of it. By the time I got home, my anger had turned into a plan. If they ever called me again, and I doubted they would, I'd show up with a 5-course meal in tow. I'd set it up right there in their kitchen, complete with candles and a tablecloth, and when they inevitably asked what I was doing, I'd smile sweetly and say, "Just being prepared, as you suggested." Of course, I'd never actually go back. Life's too short to work for people who treat you like a stray dog begging for scraps. But the fantasy was satisfying enough to carry me through the rest of the night. When my cousin Elliot told me he was publishing a book, I thought it was a joke. The guy could barely string together coherent texts, let alone write an entire novel. But no, he was dead serious. "It's sci-fi," he said at our family barbecue, practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. "Kind of dystopian, but with hopeful undertones. Took me 3 years to finish it." I nodded politely, masking my skepticism. "Wow, that's ambitious," I said. "Will you come to the launch party?" he asked, his voice full of the kind of unguarded hope that made me feel a little bad for doubting him. Of course, I lied. The invitation arrived a week later. A glossy card with his name embossed in gold. The book's title, Ashes of Tomorrow, loomed across the front in a dramatic font. I chuckled to myself. It sounded like the kind of paperback you'd find in a grocery store checkout line. As the date approached, I kept telling myself I'd go. I even picked out an outfit, a black sweater and jeans, something casual enough to say, "I'm here, but I'm not here to be impressed." But when the day came, I stared at the invitation on my counter and felt a pang of resistance. Did I really want to spend my evening pretending to care about a book I'd never read? I could already picture the awkward conversations, the forced applause. It wasn't like skipping one party would crush Elliot's spirit. I texted him 5 hours before the event. "Hey, something's come up at work. Can't make it tonight, but congrats. Proud of you." Then I turned off my phone and spent the evening the way I wanted, on my couch, eating Thai takeout and watching a documentary about train heists. By the time I checked my phone the next morning, I had a single text from Elliot. "Oh, okay. Short, curt, whatever." He'd get over it. The problem started a week later at Sunday dinner. My aunt, Elliot's mom, cornered me in the kitchen while I was trying to scoop mashed potatoes onto my plate. "Why weren't you at Elliot's book launch?" she asked, her voice just a touch too sweet. I fumbled for an excuse, but she cut me off. "He was really hurt, you know. He saved you a signed copy, but you didn't even show up." I blinked at her, my plate suddenly feeling heavier. "It's not like I don't support him," I said defensively. "I just had stuff going on." "Stuff like what?" she pressed. I mumbled something about deadlines and left the kitchen before she could press further. But the guilt lingered. Maybe I should have gone, if only to spare myself the family drama. I decided to reach out to Elliot directly. I called him the next day, and to my surprise, he answered on the first ring. "Hey, Eli," I began, trying to sound casual. "Sorry I missed your thing last week. Work's been crazy, but I heard it went well." There was a pause, long enough to make me uncomfortable. "You didn't miss my thing," he said finally, his voice flat. "You missed one of the biggest nights of my life." I sighed. "Elliot, come on. It's just a book launch." "Just a book launch?" he repeated, his voice sharpening. "Do you know how many times I've talked to you about this book? How excited I was to share it with people I care about. You didn't even bother to show up, not for 10 minutes. I felt my chest tighten. "Elliot, I get it, okay? But it's not like I didn't congratulate you. I'm proud of you. You know that." "Do I?" he shot back. "Because it sure doesn't feel like it. It feels like you couldn't be bothered to show up because you didn't think it was important enough." I was caught off guard by the intensity of his words. "Eli, I didn't mean to." "It doesn't matter what you meant," he interrupted. "You weren't there. And it sucks because I thought you would be. I thought you'd want to be." The line went quiet, but I could hear his breathing, steady and cold. I scrambled for a response, but nothing I said felt right. Finally, I muttered, "I'm sorry." "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." Then he hung up. Over the next few days, I tried to shake it off, but his words stuck with me. I hadn't thought missing the launch would matter. I'd assumed he'd have plenty of support from other people, that my absence wouldn't leave a mark. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how often I'd brushed off Elliot's efforts. His short stories, his poetry, even his nerdy board game nights. I'd always thought of his hobbies as quirks, not real passions. But maybe that was the problem. I ended up buying a copy of his book out of guilt. I even read it, expecting it to be mediocre at best. Instead, I found myself drawn into a vivid, haunting world full of characters I couldn't help but root for. It wasn't just good, it was incredible. By the time I closed the cover, I felt a pang of regret sharper than any lecture from my aunt. So here I am, wondering if I underestimated not just the importance of the launch, but Elliot himself. Did I let my own assumptions blind me to what really mattered? Or is he overreacting? AITA? I don't know why I answered the phone that day. I never answer unknown numbers. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just boredom. Either way, the woman on the other end changed my life forever. "Is this Alex Hastings?" she asked, her voice crisp and professional. Yeah," I said cautiously, half expecting a sales pitch for solar panels or extended warranties. "Congratulations," she said, as if we were in the middle of a conversation. "You've been selected as the winner of the Windriver Wilderness Lodge giveaway." I blinked. "The what?" "The Windriver Wilderness Lodge giveaway," she repeated patiently. "You entered a contest last year during the Holiday Expo. Grand prize, full ownership of the lodge, including 200 acres of surrounding land. The paperwork is ready for you to claim it." I had absolutely no memory of entering any such contest, but then again, last year was a blur of late shifts and cheap wine. "Wait, I won a lodge?" I said, half laughing. "Like, an actual building?" "Yes," she replied. "And the land. Congratulations again. Shall I email you the details?" I mumbled a yes, hung up, and stared at my reflection in the microwave door. A lodge. An actual lodge. What even was my life? 2 months later, after clearing up some legalities and driving 3 states away, I stood in front of my prize. The Windriver Wilderness Lodge was not exactly the postcard-perfect retreat I'd imagined. The building was massive but weathered. Its once pristine wood faded to a dull gray. A peeling sign dangled precariously from a single hook, and the surrounding land, though undeniably beautiful, was wild to the point of chaos. It looked like something out of a horror movie where teenagers go to die. But it was mine. And the thing about me is, I can't resist a challenge. I spent weeks cleaning, repairing, and figuring out how to turn this place into something functional. The idea hit me during one of those late nights when I was sanding floors. I could use the lodge to bring everyone I love together. A big family reunion. My parents hadn't seen my aunt and uncle in years. My sister and her husband were always too busy for holidays. My best friends had drifted since college. This was my chance to give us all a magical experience. A weekend in the wilderness, bonding, laughing, reconnecting. The invites went out with a promise. All expenses paid, luxury accommodations, and a once-in-a-lifetime chance to disconnect from the chaos of modern life. To my delight, nearly everyone RSVP'd yes. I envisioned group hikes, campfire sing-alongs, and the kind of memories you hold on to for decades. The first car arrived on Friday afternoon. It was my sister Rachel and her husband, Mark. They stepped out, took one look at the lodge, and exchanged a glance that made my stomach drop. "This is cozy," Rachel said, her tone laced with skepticism. Mark pointed at the roof. "Is that moss? Is moss supposed to grow on roofs?" "It's rustic," I said, forcing a smile. "Wait until you see the inside." The rest of the group trickled in over the next few hours, their reactions ranging from polite to outright horrified. My mom pulled me aside within 10 minutes. "Alex, honey, do the showers work?" she whispered, like it was a state secret. "Of course they work," I said, though I'd only tested 2 of them. Dinner didn't go much better. I'd planned a casual, family-style meal, but the lodge's ancient stove had other plans. Half the food came out undercooked, and the other half was charred beyond recognition. My dad, bless him, tried to make light of it. "Well, nothing like a little extra protein in your steak," he said, picking off what might have been a beetle. By the second day, the complaints started rolling in. Rachel was furious that there was no Wi-Fi. "You said this was luxury. I have emails to answer," she hissed, holding her phone in the air like it might catch a signal from heaven. Mark got poison ivy within an hour of stepping outside and spent the rest of the trip scratching and sulking. My mom refused to sleep on the mattress I'd so lovingly refurbished because it smelled like mothballs. My Aunt Linda thought the hike I planned was too steep, while her husband, Jim, complained it wasn't challenging enough. Sam, my best friend from college, brought her boyfriend, who got drunk and broke one of the antique chairs by using it as a prop in an impromptu wrestling match. The final straw came during the big family dinner I'd planned as the centerpiece of the trip. I'd pulled out all the stops: homemade pasta, freshly baked bread, a roaring fire in the stone hearth. But halfway through, Rachel stood up, wine glass in hand, and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't pretend anymore. Alex, this whole weekend has been a disaster." "Rachel," my mom gasped. "No, I'm serious," Rachel said, gesturing wildly. "The lodge is falling apart, the food is terrible, and I have bug bites in places I didn't know bugs could reach. Did you even think this through?" I stared at her, speechless. Sam chimed in. "I mean, she's not wrong," she said, poking at her pasta. "The sauce is kinda watery." The whole table erupted. Everyone had something to say. The beds were too lumpy, the water smelled funny, the wilderness was too loud at night. Even my dad, who I thought was on my side, muttered something about over-ambitious planning. By the time the shouting died down, I felt like a deflated balloon. I'd poured my heart into this weekend, and all I'd gotten in return was criticism. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and said, "You know what? Forget it. I try to do something nice for all of you. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could have a weekend where we weren't glued to our phones or complaining about our lives." But clearly, that was too much to ask. "So, enjoy your watery pasta. I'm done." I stormed out and spent the rest of the night sitting on the porch, listening to the wind in the trees and wondering why I'd ever thought this was a good idea. The next morning, they all left without much fanfare. Rachel gave me a stiff hug and muttered something about Venmoing me for gas. My mom said, "We'll talk soon," which in mom speak means I'm disappointed, but I'll never say it outright. Sam didn't even bother saying goodbye. Now, as I sit here in this big, empty lodge, I keep replaying the weekend in my head. I thought I was giving everyone a gift, a chance to unplug and reconnect. Instead, I feel like I dragged them into my personal disaster. So, AITA? The rain came down in sheets, drowning the city in its endless rhythm. Cars honked in frustration, their headlights casting distorted reflections on the slick streets. In the heart of the chaos, beneath the neon glow of a flickering Lucky Dragon sign, Elias leaned against a crumbling brick wall. He lit a cigarette with a match that sputtered in the downpour, exhaling a plume of smoke that mingled with the damp air. The rain didn't bother him. It rarely did. He had bigger problems. The package in his coat pocket felt heavier than it should have been. His contact had said it was just a simple delivery, but Elias had been in the game long enough to know there was no such thing. A simple delivery usually meant trouble, and trouble had a way of finding him. "You're late," a voice said, cutting through the rain like a knife. Elias turned, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife strapped to his boot. The speaker was a woman, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat that dripped water onto the collar of her trench coat. Her voice was low, almost a growl, and her gloved hands were tucked into her pockets. "Had to take the scenic route," Elias replied, flicking the cigarette to the ground. "Traffic, you know." She didn't laugh. Her gaze, what little he could see of it beneath the hat, was unflinching. "Do you have it?" Elias reached into his coat, fingers brushing against the cold surface of the package. It was wrapped in brown paper, tied with string, as inconspicuous as a box of pastries. But Elias knew better. He held it out, and the woman took it without hesitation. "You're not going to check it?" he asked, his tone casual, though his muscles were taut with readiness. She tilted her head, the shadow of a smirk playing at her lips. "I trust you. That's your first mistake." Her smile disappeared, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the rain hammering around them. Then, as if on cue, the air seemed to shift. Elias felt it before he saw it, the kind of charged energy that made his skin crawl. He turned, his knife already in hand, just as the first figure emerged from the alley. It was a man, though man felt like the wrong word. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette controlled by clumsy hands. His eyes glowed faintly, a sickly green light that seemed to pulse in time with the rain. Behind him, more figures emerged, 6, no, 7, each with the same eerie gait and glowing eyes. "Friends of yours?" Elias asked, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his chest. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she pulled a gun from her coat, the click of the safety a sharp counterpoint to the rain. "Get behind me," she said. Elias laughed, the sound bitter. "Not my style." The first figure lunged, its movements faster than Elias expected. He barely had time to react, the blade of his knife flashing as it met the creature's neck. The thing didn't bleed. Instead, a dark, viscous liquid seeped from the wound, and it fell to the ground with a guttural hiss. "Great," Elias muttered. "They're not human." The woman fired, the gunshot echoing through the narrow alley. One of the creatures dropped, its glowing eyes flickering before going dark. But the others didn't stop. They moved as one, their bodies contorting in ways that defied logic. "Any idea what these things are?" Elias asked, ducking under a swipe from one of the creatures. His knife found its mark again, though he doubted it would do much good in the long run. "Sentinels," the woman said, her tone grim. "They're here for the package." "Figures," Elias muttered. "What's in it, anyway? World-ending magic? Top-secret government files? A cursed sandwich?" The woman didn't answer, which was answer enough. The fight was brutal. Elias moved like a dancer, his knife a blur as he slashed and dodged. The woman was equally skilled, her gun never missing its mark. But for every creature they took down, another seemed to take its place. The alley was a battlefield, and they were losing. "Plan B?" Elias asked, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The woman hesitated, her eyes flicking to the package still tucked under her arm. Then she nodded. "Run. Run?" Elias echoed. "That's your plan?" "Trust me," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Elias didn't trust her, not really, but he didn't have a better idea. Together, they bolted, the creatures close behind. The city blurred around them, neon signs and dark alleys blending into a chaotic whirl. Elias's lungs burned, his legs screaming in protest, but he didn't stop. They burst into an abandoned subway station, the air damp and stale. The woman skidded to a halt, her gun raised as she scanned the shadows. "Now what?" Elias asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. "We wait for the train to purgatory?" The woman ignored him, her focus on the package. She tore the paper away, revealing a black box etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. "Don't touch it," she warned, as if he had any intention of doing so. "What is that thing?" Elias asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed the box on the ground and began muttering under her breath. The symbols glowed, a faint hum filling the air. The creatures appeared at the entrance to the station, their glowing eyes fixed on the box. "Whatever you're doing," Elias said, drawing his knife again, "do it faster." The woman didn't look up. The hum grew louder, the symbols pulsing with light. The creatures lunged, and Elias met them head-on, his movements fueled by sheer desperation. He wasn't going to survive this. He knew it, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. Then, just as the creatures closed in, the box exploded in a burst of light. Elias was thrown backward, his ears ringing. When he opened his eyes, the creatures were gone, the subway eerily silent. The woman stood, the box now a charred husk at her feet. She looked at Elias, her expression unreadable. "That," she said, "was Plan B." Elias stared at her, then laughed, a deep, guttural laugh that echoed through the empty station. "You're insane." She smiled, and for the first time, it was genuine. "Maybe, but you're alive, aren't you?" Elias shook his head, pulling himself to his feet. "Next time someone says, 'simple delivery,' remind me to run the other way." The woman chuckled, turning toward the exit. "Next time, maybe you should ask what's in the package first." Elias watched her go, the rain swallowing her silhouette. He lit another cigarette, the flame steady despite the tremor in his hand. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but one thing was certain. He wasn't taking any more jobs for a while. Or at least, not without asking more questions. The knock at my door came at exactly 3:03 a.m. That's the sort of thing you remember. The specificity of it, how the numbers lined up in a way that felt deliberate, like a code meant to unsettle. My phone was on the nightstand, its screen glowing faintly, 17 unread messages from work lighting up like a Vegas slot machine. The world outside was silent. Too silent for the middle of the city, where sirens and drunken laughter usually formed the backdrop of my restless nights. I don't know what compelled me to answer. Maybe it was the curiosity, or maybe it was the sort of bone-deep exhaustion that strips away self-preservation. Either way, I pulled myself out of bed, the wooden floor cold beneath my feet, and shuffled to the door. The man standing there didn't look like he belonged anywhere. His suit was black and sharply tailored, but the fabric shimmered unnaturally, like it couldn't quite decide if it was real. His face was pale, almost luminous, with cheekbones so sharp they looked like they could cut glass. His eyes? They weren't eyes. Not really. Just two deep pools of shadow that seemed to suck in the dim light from my hallway. Simon Graves? His voice was soft, almost musical, but there was an undertone to it that made my skin crawl, like hearing a familiar song played backward. That depends, I said, gripping the edge of the door like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Are you selling something? Because if you're here about my car warranty, I am not, he interrupted, a flicker of amusement crossing his too-perfect face. May I come in? I stared at him, wondering if this was one of those moments that would later be described in police reports and true crime podcasts. But there was something magnetic about him, something that made it impossible to look away. Against every rational instinct, I stepped aside. He glided in, not walked, glided, his shoes making no sound against the floor. He carried a sleek, black briefcase, which he set carefully on my coffee table before sinking into the armchair, as if he'd sat there 1,000 times before. I represent, let's call it an organization, he began, his hands steepled in front of him. We are in the business of offering people certain opportunities. Unique opportunities. You're selling something, I said flatly, my initial fear morphing into irritation. You just phrased it like a Bond villain to make it sound fancy. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that belonged in oil paintings. Not quite. What I offer cannot be bought. It must be earned. Would you like to hear the terms? I didn't answer. My brain was still playing catch-up, flipping through mental indexes for anything that explained this man-shaped enigma. He took my silence as consent. Tonight, you have a chance to rewrite one moment in your life. A single decision, big or small, undone or remade as you see fit. The catch is that the rest of your life will shift accordingly, the ripples rearranging the world as you know it. You will remember the life you lived before and the one you create. No one else will. I blinked at him. You're joking. His expression didn't change. I rarely joke. Okay, I said slowly, dragging out the syllables like they were stuck to my tongue. Let's say I believe you. Why me? Why now? He opened the briefcase, revealing a small hourglass filled with sand that shimmered like liquid gold. It was mesmerizing, the kind of thing you could stare at for hours and lose yourself in. Because the window for this choice is closing, Simon. Once the last grain falls, the opportunity vanishes forever. It's a rare gift, and it is not offered lightly. I laughed, a short, brittle sound. You've got the wrong guy. My life's fine. Boring, sure, but fine. I'm not sitting around nursing any deep regrets. Are you not? His head tilted, bird-like, and for the first time, those shadowy eyes seemed to focus on me. Really focus. What about her? I froze. The words hit like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of me. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? He gestured to the hourglass, which seemed to be emptying faster now, the golden sand slipping away at an alarming rate. You have one moment, Simon. Choose wisely. Memories surged up, unbidden and relentless. Her laugh, loud and uninhibited, echoing off the walls of that dingy cafe. The way her hands moved when she talked, as if they couldn't keep up with her thoughts. The way I'd watched her walk away that last time, too proud, or too scared, to call her back. It wasn't just regret. It was an ache, a black hole where something beautiful used to be. What happens if I don't choose? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back, the faintest smile curling his lips. Then you wake up tomorrow, and your life continues as it always has. Mundane, unremarkable, entirely yours. I looked at the hourglass. The sand was nearly gone now, just a thin layer clinging to the bottom. My chest tightened. What if it gets worse? What if I ruin everything? He shrugged. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Isn't the uncertainty part of the thrill? The last grain teetered on the edge, a single thread of gold holding the past and future in balance. My breath caught as the room seemed to hum, a low vibration that set my teeth on edge. I made my choice, and when the grain fell, the world shattered. It started with an avocado. Not a loan, not a huge betrayal, just an avocado. Or more specifically, my avocado, which I'd planned to eat for breakfast the next morning. When I opened the fridge and saw the empty space where it had been, I assumed it was a mistake. Maybe I'd misplaced it. Maybe it had rolled behind the milk carton. But no. Later that night, I found the telltale evidence in the trash. The pit, scraped clean, resting on a bed of tortilla chip crumbs. Did you eat my avocado? I texted my roommate Zara. The reply came instantly. Oh yeah, sorry, I thought it was mine. Her response annoyed me more than I cared to admit. Zara and I weren't strangers. We were friends. Close enough that when she'd struggled to find a place after her breakup, I'd offered her my spare room. It wasn't ideal. My apartment was small, and Zara's temporary stay quickly stretched into months. But I'd told myself it was worth it because she needed the help. Friends look out for each other, right? That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, little things started to pile up. Food disappearing. A missing bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Zara swiping my shampoo, my toothpaste, my deodorant, like I was her personal CVS. She always had excuses. Oh, I forgot to grab some. Or, I was going to replace it, but I got busy. Busy doing what? Exactly? Most days, she barely left the apartment, claiming she was working on herself, which, as far as I could tell, meant scrolling TikTok in her pajamas. I tried to let it go, but the resentment festered. It wasn't about the avocado or the shampoo. It was the principle. I was busting my ass at work, while Zara drifted through her days like a cloud, oblivious to how much she was taking from me. Then came the money. It started innocently enough. Can I borrow $40? Zara asked one night, her voice dripping with contrition. I'm waiting for this freelance check to come in, and I'm short for groceries. I hesitated. She'd been living rent-free for months, and I was already footing most of the bills. But she promised she'd pay me back by Friday, so I handed her the cash. Friday came and went. No check, no repayment, just Zara's endless string of excuses. My client's being super flaky, she'd say, or, I'm so embarrassed about this. I hate owing people money. But the thing was, she didn't hate it enough to stop asking. A week later, it was $60, then $100. By the third request, I didn't even bother asking when she'd pay me back. Meanwhile, Zara's lifestyle didn't exactly scream financial hardship. She'd order takeout nearly every night. Clothes from trendy online boutiques kept arriving at the door. One afternoon, I came home to find her perched on the couch, unboxing a ring light and a brand new microphone. What's all this? I asked, gesturing to the pile of tech equipment. She beamed. I'm starting a podcast. It's going to be all about, healing and self-discovery. You know, my journey. Her journey. Right. I bit my tongue, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But the tipping point came 2 weeks later. I'd just gotten home from a 12-hour shift, my feet aching, my head pounding, when Zara waltzed in, grinning like she'd won the lottery. She dumped a pile of shopping bags onto the counter, some kind of skincare haul, and started chatting about how retail therapy was the best form of self-care. I stared at her, barely able to process the scene unfolding in front of me. Zara, I said slowly, You still owe me $350, and you haven't even paid me for utilities this month." Her smile faltered for a split second before she waved me off. "Oh, relax. You know I'm good for it." "No," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "I don't know that. You've been freeloading here for months, and every time I try to talk about money, you brush it off like it's no big deal." She recoiled like I'd slapped her. "Wow, I didn't realize you were keeping score." "Of course I'm keeping score, Zara. Do you think I'm made of money?" Her eyes narrowed. "You've got a steady job, savings, a nice place. You're acting like this is some massive burden, but you're fine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's not the point. The point is, you're taking advantage of me." "Taking advantage?" she snapped. "You're the one holding this over my head like I'm some kind of parasite. Maybe I should just move out if you feel so burdened." "Maybe you should," I shot back. Her face twisted with indignation. "You know what? You're selfish. All you care about is money. I thought we were friends." That stung, more than it should have, but I was too angry to care. "If this is how you treat your friends, no wonder your ex dumped you." The words hung in the air, sharp and unforgivable. Zara's face crumpled, and for a split second, I wanted to take it back. But then she grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. She hasn't spoken to me since. I thought I'd feel relieved, but mostly I just feel hollow. Maybe I should have been more patient. Maybe I let my frustration get the best of me. But at the same time, I can't shake the feeling that Zara was using me, and I was right to call her out. The package arrived on a Wednesday, unmarked except for Hazel's name, scrawled in an elegant, looping script across the top. She found it on her doorstep when she came home from work, balanced precariously against the chipped frame of her apartment door. No return address, no postage stamp, just her name. She stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. It was heavier than it looked, wrapped in plain brown paper that crinkled under her fingers. For someone who rarely received mail, much less packages, it was both intriguing and unnerving. The idea of opening it right there in the hallway felt too exposed, so she carried it inside, locking the door behind her. Hazel placed the package on her kitchen table, her keys jangling against the surface as she set them down. She fetched a knife from the drawer and hesitated, the blade hovering over the paper. For a second, she considered calling someone, her mom, her friend Clara, but the thought felt ridiculous. What would she say? "Hey, I got a package and I'm scared to open it." She sliced through the paper. Inside was a small wooden box, polished to a deep, almost mirror-like shine. It was old, centuries old, maybe. Its surface carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift if she stared too long. A faint smell of cedar and something metallic wafted out as she lifted the lid. At first, she thought the box was empty, but as she tilted it toward the light, she saw something glimmering in the corner. A coin. It was unlike any currency Hazel had ever seen. About the size of a quarter, but much thinner. Its surface was etched with symbols she didn't recognize. On one side, a face stared back at her, a woman with hollow eyes and hair that twisted like smoke. On the other, a phrase written in jagged letters, "Every gift has a cost." Her skin prickled. She wanted to put the coin back, to close the lid and push the box far, far away. But before she could act, a voice, soft, lilting, and impossibly close, whispered, "Flip it." Hazel spun around, but her apartment was empty. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere. Her fingers tightened around the coin, its edges biting into her skin. Her pulse quickened, her breath shallow. "Flip it," the voice urged again, softer this time, almost pleading. "No," she said aloud, though her voice shook. "I'm not doing this." But as if the coin had a will of its own, her thumb brushed its edge, and before she could stop herself, she flicked it into the air. It spun, catching the dim light of the room in flashes, and when it landed on the table, Hazel's world shifted. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the normal quiet of her apartment, with its faint hum of the fridge or the distant murmur of traffic. This was an unnatural stillness, as though the world had taken a deep breath and forgotten how to exhale. Then came the shadow. It slithered out from under the table, a formless mass that grew and stretched, its edges curling like smoke. Hazel stumbled back, her heart hammering. The shadow rose, shaping itself into something almost human. Its head tilted, as if studying her, though it had no eyes. "You've made your choice," it said, its voice a low rumble that vibrated through her chest. "I didn't," Hazel began, but the shadow cut her off. "All choices have consequences," it said, and before she could move, it lunged. The impact never came. Instead, the world blinked. Hazel found herself standing in the middle of a bustling market, the air thick with the scents of spices and roasted meat. The sky was a deep shade of violet, with two suns hanging low on the horizon. People, or at least, creatures resembling people, milled about, their features ranging from slightly unusual to completely alien. A woman with skin like polished stone sold glowing fruit from a stall. A child with antlers chased a floating orb that giggled when it dodged him. "What? Where?" Hazel stammered, spinning in place. "You are here," the shadow's voice echoed in her mind, though it was nowhere to be seen. "The coin has spoken." "What does that mean?" she shouted, but no one paid her any attention. "Where am I?" "A world that hungers," the voice said, fading into a low chuckle. "You must feed it." Before Hazel could demand an explanation, she noticed something strange. The coin was still in her hand, but it felt heavier now. She looked down and nearly dropped it. The face of the woman on the coin was gone. In its place was Hazel's own reflection, her hollow eyes staring back at her. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Her surroundings shimmered, the market twisting and warping like paint swirling in water. When it settled, Hazel was back in her apartment, the box and coin gone. Everything looked the same, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her back. For weeks, Hazel felt it, an unseen presence that watched her, waited for her. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward her, every corner of her apartment felt alive. And then, one day, the package reappeared on her doorstep. This time, her name wasn't the only thing written on it. Below the looping script were 4 words that made her stomach drop. "The debt is due." When Sam suggested we take a trip, I was instantly on board. Not just because I love to travel, but because our lives had been a grind lately. Deadlines, rent, family drama, the works. I needed to shake off the cobwebs. But as soon as they said, "Let's find a quiet beach somewhere and unplug," I realized we were about to have a problem. "Okay, but hear me out," I said carefully, like I was defusing a bomb. "What if instead of a beach, we do something more adventurous, like hiking in Patagonia or maybe backpacking in Thailand? You know, get off the grid." Sam gave me a look like I'd suggested joining a cult. Get off the grid? That's literally what I'm saying. Except, instead of trekking through mosquito-infested jungles, we're sipping mojitos and hammocks. Mojitos and hammocks are nice, I admitted. But don't you ever want to, like, experience something? Climb a mountain? Swim under a waterfall? Discover an ancient ruin? Sam tilted their head, pretending to think about it. "No, I want to discover the perfect nap." We laughed about it that night, but over the next few weeks, things got complicated. Every time I brought up my dream destinations, Sam countered with glossy Instagram pics of infinity pools and white sand beaches. I'd say, "What about Peru?" And Sam would say, "What about Fiji?" It was like playing vacation tug-of-war, but the stakes felt oddly high. One night, as we were sitting on the couch with takeout containers balanced on our knees, I decided to make my pitch. "Look, I get it," I started, gesturing with a spring roll like it was a pointer. "You want to relax, and I respect that. But a vacation is about making memories, right? And no one remembers their 5th day on a beach. They remember the crazy stuff, the stories you tell later. Like, hey, remember the time we got lost hiking and found that secret hot spring? Or, remember when we rode motorcycles through the countryside and almost got attacked by goats?" Sam raised an eyebrow. "I'm supposed to look forward to being attacked by goats?" "You know what I mean," I said, exasperated. "It's about the adventure." Sam set their chopsticks down, suddenly serious. "Okay, but can I tell you why I want the beach?" "Sure." They paused, like they weren't sure how to say it. Finally, they said, "Because I'm tired." Like, bone deep, soul level tired. Every day feels like a marathon, and I just want 1 week. Just one. Where I don't have to think or try or do anything. Where the hardest decision I make is whether to have another daiquiri. I stared at them, guilt blooming in my chest. Because, yeah, Sam was tired. They'd been pulling late nights at work, dealing with family nonsense, and trying to keep our chaotic lives together while I spun out dreaming of glaciers and temples. I hadn't really stopped to think about what they needed. But still, I get that, I said quietly. I do. But you know how I grew up. We never went anywhere. Like, anywhere. I've spent my whole life feeling like the world is this huge, amazing place, and I'm stuck in this one tiny corner of it. A vacation isn't just about relaxing for me. It's about seeing what's out there. Feeling alive. Do you get that? Sam nodded slowly, but their face was unreadable. I get it, they said, but it sounds like what you want is your dream trip, not ours. That hit me hard. Were they right? Was I being selfish? Or was it fair to want a vacation that felt meaningful to me, too? We tried to compromise. I suggested a mix of beach and adventure, a trip to Costa Rica with ziplining for me and spa days for Sam. But Sam said, that just sounds like we're both half happy. When Sam pitched a full-on luxury resort with maybe a snorkeling excursion, if you're feeling wild, I felt my stomach sink. The idea of sitting still for 7 days sounded like torture. The tension started bleeding into other parts of our lives. We'd snap at each other over little things. Laundry, dishes, whose turn it was to take the trash out. It wasn't really about the chores, though. It was about the fact that neither of us wanted to admit we were at an impasse. We both wanted this trip to be perfect, but our versions of perfect were worlds apart. Then, one night, I had a dream. Sam and I were on a beach, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and pink. It should have been peaceful, but we were yelling at each other. I wanted to climb a nearby cliff to see the view, and Sam wanted to stay in the sand. The weird thing was, we were tied together by this long, fraying rope. Every time one of us tried to go our own way, the rope tightened, cutting into our wrists. I woke up in a sweat, my heart pounding. The next morning, I told Sam about the dream. They laughed, but there was a sadness in it. Sounds about right, they said. We're stuck, huh? Maybe, I admitted, but we're stuck together. That night, we made a radical decision. We booked 2 separate trips. Sam picked an all-inclusive resort in Turks and Caicos, and I booked a backpacking tour through the Scottish Highlands. It wasn't a compromise. It wasn't even a solution, but it felt like the only way to give each other what we needed. When we told our friends, they were divided. Half thought it was genius, proof that we were mature enough to respect each other's differences. The other half thought it was a disaster waiting to happen. Aren't vacations supposed to bring couples closer? One friend asked. What if you grow apart? I didn't know the answer to that, but I knew one thing for sure. Forcing ourselves into a trip that made one of us miserable wasn't the way to grow closer, either. So here I am, 2 weeks before our separate departures, wondering if we've made the right call. Part of me feels excited, free, even, but part of me can't shake the image of that fraying rope in my dream. Are we giving each other space, or are we untying the knot? When Mira and I decided to get a pet, it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. No, this was a long, drawn-out campaign on her part. She'd been slipping it into conversations for months. A cat would be so cozy in the winter. You know what this apartment needs? A little fluff to curl up on the couch. Cats reduce stress, you know. Scientifically proven. It wasn't until she brought out the big guns, those late-night adoption site scrolls, showing me picture after picture of wide-eyed kittens looking for homes, that I finally caved. Fine, I said one evening, after she showed me a photo of a gray and white tabby with the saddest, most manipulative little face I'd ever seen. But we have to agree on responsibilities up front. I'm not cleaning up litter boxes on my own. Obviously, she said, grinning like she'd won a prize. We'll make a chore chart or something. Totally fair. Famous last words. We named the cat Machi. She wasn't the sad little tabby from the website, but a scrappy tuxedo kitten who kept swatting at my shoelaces the moment we entered the shelter. She's got spunk, Mira said approvingly, as Machi leaped onto her shoulder like a pirate's parrot. Spunk was right. The first week, she managed to escape her carrier, climb the curtains, and knock over a potted plant, all within the first hour of arriving home. At first, we were enchanted. Mira and I spent our evenings sitting on the floor, trying to teach Machi how to bat at toy mice. She slept in a tiny curl at the foot of our bed, her purring like a miniature lawnmower. Mira made it clear she was Machi's favorite, mostly because she spent an unreasonable amount of time dangling string in front of her face. "Look at her little paws," Mira would squeal. "She's perfect." But a few weeks in, the glow started to wear off. For me, anyway. Mira, it turned out, loved playing with Machi, but the less glamorous parts of pet ownership, those were conveniently forgotten. The litter box was the first battleground. Mira had sworn she'd totally handle it, but by week 2, I was the one scooping out clumps while gagging into a scarf. "I'll do it tomorrow," she'd say whenever I asked her to take a turn. Tomorrow always came, but her promises didn't. Then came the feeding issue. Mira insisted on feeding Machi herself because she wanted to bond, but her idea of feeding involved shaking kibble into a bowl whenever she happened to remember. Once, I came home to find Machi yowling like she was auditioning for Cats, the horror movie. Her bowl was empty, and Mira was curled up on the couch, scrolling TikTok. "When was the last time you fed her?" I asked, crouching to soothe Machi. Mira glanced up, frowning like the question itself was offensive. "This morning." "She's starving," I said, filling the bowl. "She's fine," Mira said, rolling her eyes. "Cats are survivors. They're not like goldfish or something." I wanted to argue, but Machi's pitiful meow stopped me. I gave her an extra scoop of kibble and bit my tongue. The final straw came a month later. Machi had been acting strange, skittish, even for her. She hid under the bed more often and stopped curling up with us at night. I tried to bring it up with Mira, but she brushed it off. "She's probably just moody," she said, scrolling through her phone. "Cats are weird." That Saturday, I came home after running errands to find the apartment in chaos. The curtains were half pulled off the rod. A glass had shattered on the kitchen floor, and Machi was nowhere to be seen. Mira was sitting on the couch, eating chips like nothing had happened. "What the hell happened here?" I asked, gesturing at the wreckage. Mira shrugged. She got a little crazy. "I guess she's bored." "Bored?" I said, incredulous. "Did you play with her?" Mira gave me a sheepish look. "I was going to, but then I got distracted." "You mean you've been sitting here while she's tearing the place apart?" I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. "She's a cat, Jake," Mira said, her tone defensive. "What do you want me to do? Entertain her 24/7? "No," I snapped. "I want you to take care of her like you promised." "I do take care of her," she shot back. "I just don't obsess over it like you do." "Obsess?" I echoed, my voice rising. "If I didn't obsess, she'd starve, and the apartment would smell like a landfill." "You wanted this cat, Mira. I told you I'd only do this if we shared the responsibility." "And we do," she said, throwing up her hands. "I feed her. I play with her." "Not enough," I interrupted. "She's miserable, Mira. She's acting out because she's bored and stressed, and it's not her fault. It's ours." "Oh, so now you're blaming me," she said, her face flushing. "You're the one who insisted we couldn't get a second cat to keep her company, because we can barely handle one." I shot back. The fight spiraled from there, the kind of argument where neither person is really listening anymore. When it was over, Mira stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I sat down on the floor, exhausted and miserable. Machi poked her head out from under the bed, her big eyes wary. "Hey, Mach," I said softly, reaching out a hand. She came to me slowly, settling into my lap with a little huff, as if to say, "Humans are exhausting." Mira came back later that night, but we didn't talk much. She spent the next day pretending everything was fine, but it wasn't. The tension hung between us, thick and suffocating. Meanwhile, Machi started spending more and more time hiding under the bed, her once playful energy replaced with nervous pacing. I hate how this has turned out. I love Machi, and I want to give her the best life possible, but I can't do it alone. And I'm starting to wonder if Mira and I are even on the same page anymore. Am I being unreasonable for expecting her to step up? Or is it fair to feel like this whole thing is her responsibility since she pushed for it in the first place?